Dusk settles over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as a chain-link gate claps shut and Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale steps into a 20 by 20 foot training pen. Petty Officer Second Class Travis Kincaid calls it a pressure test, while Master Chief Ethan Rourke stands back with a clipboard, measuring, giving nothing away. Ranger, Brawler, and Spartan flow into the space like muscle and wires. Hackles raised, mouths set, eyes hard. Each step a low stalk that tests distance and resolve. Ranger holds the front. Brawler angles left. Spartan drifts right. A flanking pattern that would fold around a threat and drive it to the fence. Morgan does not square her shoulders or lock eyes, because a fixed stare reads like a challenge. So she softens her frame, lowers to one knee, and lets her breathing slide into a slow, even pattern. She turns her chin slightly offline to shrink her profile and extends one open palm where they can see it. Fingers relaxed. No sudden angles. No threat in the way she claims the ground. Ranger glides forward first. Nostrils working. Tail level. A ripple through his shoulders as scent maps her skin and the dust in her sleeves. Then he eases close until his forehead rests against the center of her chest. Brawler and Spartan stop their arc. Sit in a loose triangle. Mouths opening to breathe. Ears easing down as drive thins into focus, and the pen goes very still around the sound of her breath. The stunt violates safety and welfare. It is not authorized. The Marine layer sits low over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at what feels like 5:30 a.m. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale stands at parade rest near the chow hall. Sleeves rolled clean, and even on a pressed Army combat uniform. Hair set in a regulation bun. Her desert boots plant shoulder-width apart on damp concrete that holds the night's chill. Footsteps approach with the steady pace of someone who has done this walk for years. Master Chief Ethan Rourke carries a clipboard and studies her the way he would study a checklist. Efficient and cool. He stops at a respectful distance, the gray light making his expression unreadable. He delivers tasking with the ease of practiced authority. She is a temporary evaluator from the United States Special Operations, Command K-9 Support Detachment, billeted in transient barracks, away from the team area, working to daily training schedules issued each morning. The words land crisp, without extra weight or sentiment. Two SEALs pass behind him with trays from the chow hall. Faces flat and eyes sliding across, new variables like weather reports. No greetings. No small talk. Only the quiet pressure of a place that measures people by what they do next. The air smells like salt, disinfectant, and coffee that has been on the burner too long. Morgan answers with a short acknowledgement that fits the chain of command and the moment. She keeps her gaze steady but not challenging. Chin level. Hands quiet at her sides. The bun at the nape of her neck does not move when a breeze cuts through her sleeves. Rourke notes her report time and turns away without drama. The clipboard rides against his hip as he disappears into the low buildings that hold the day's work. The silence that follows feels like an open door with a clock already running. Morgan lets a breath move in and out, the way she would before a range qualification or a first step into a new lane. The friction between Army and Navy sits in the background like ground noise. Present but not personal. She files the tasking in her head, squares her shoulders a fraction, and commits to the mission without another word. Master Chief Ethan Rourke reviews the orders with a calm voice that sounds like procedure. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale is confirmed as a temporary K-9 program evaluator from the United States Special Operations Command, K-9 Support Detachment. Rourke outlines billet and boundaries in plain terms. She will live in transient barracks away from the team area and work to daily training schedules issued each morning. The chow hall smells like coffee as Petty Officer First Class Derek Hines drifts close with a test wrapped in small talk. He asks about deployments, and Morgan answers with steady eyes. Bagram and Helmand. No unit details given for operational security. She keeps her posture neutral and her hands still, using correct forms of address and the short language of acknowledgement. The message is clear without heat. That surprise tests and unbriefed objectives violate naval special warfare training, safety practices, and animal welfare guidance for military working dogs. Rourke notes compliance and timing and closes the exchange with a nod that is more checklist than praise. The chain of command is intact, and expectations are set like chalk lines on a range. Morgan gives a crisp acknowledgement and signs the check-in roster, then files the schedule rhythm in her head where it belongs. She carries a quiet promise that she is here to protect handlers, protect operators, and respect the dogs who never lie. The friction between Army and Navy hums under the scene like surf. Morgan turns toward the kennels and walks to work. Fairbanks sits wide and cold under a sky that never seems to end. Morgan Hale grows up in that thin winter light with a quiet father who flies supplies to places where roads quit. He teaches her to read the wind on a frozen lake and to respect weather like a living thing. On weekends, he lets her handle the yoke of a Cessna 172 while he watches every move. The little airplane buzzes over black spruce and white river ice while she learns gentle inputs and patient checks. She is not old enough to drive, but she already understands responsibility. Nights come clear and sharp, and he points out navigation by stars as if they are road signs. When an engine hesitates, he sets a mittened hand on the cowl and says they will fix it. A Leatherman and calm steps turn stubborn metal into a lesson about not rushing. At home, a family sled dog waits by the door with eyes that give the truth away. Morgan learns that tail set, ear tilt, and weight on the paws speak louder than shouting ever could. Dogs do not lie, and if you listen right, they will keep you safe. At 18, she enlists in the United States Army with a plan already in place. She scores high on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery and chooses military police with a clear target on the Military Working Dog program. The path is not quick, but she stays on it. Her first deployment takes her to Bagram with a Belgian Malinois named Rook. The base smells like jet fuel and sand, and the long patrols teach rhythm, hydration, and attention to small changes. Rook works the air and the ground with a focus that makes hard days feel simple. In 2019, she is attached to an operational detachment Alpha during a clearance in Helmand. Rook locks into a hard alert at a doorway that looks ordinary, and she refuses to push past him. The team leader, Captain Nathan Cole, steps forward and triggers a pressure plate device built from improvised explosives. The blast takes Captain Cole and wounds 2 others, and it shatters Morgan's left wrist. A medical evacuation flight carries her to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, where surgeons place a titanium plate and screws to hold the bones straight. Cold weather will always find that wrist, but she keeps the story plain. After recovery, she receives the Bronze Star with V device for holding position and treating casualties under fire. She signs what needs signing and goes back to work without fanfare. Rook's photograph ends up in her locker and stays there. She is selected for a Joint Special Operations K9 integration effort, identified only by a call sign. K9, Juliet 7. Missions are not discussed because the rules are clear and the quiet matters. The work is demanding and exact, and it makes her smaller in the best way. On her shoulder, a black paw with the name Rook sits above K9 Juliet 7. She touches it like a promise, before hard days and before sleep. 6 months before Coronado, she leaves the program for reasons she does not put on paper. When the request comes for a temporary evaluator at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she says yes. Mishandled dogs get operators hurt, and sometimes worse, and she refuses to let that stand. Trust the dog. Bring people home. Keep the records clean, and let the work speak for itself. The kennel block at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado wakes to the clean smell of disinfectant and wet concrete. Chain link runs line both sides. Stainless water bowls are bolted tight to the fencing, and a quiet edge of stress hums under the fluorescent buzz. At 7:00 a.m., Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale steps in with a clipboard and a calm face. Petty Officer Second Class Travis Kincaid meets her at the gate and identifies himself as the senior handler. And she answers with correct forms of address and a neutral nod. Ranger waits 3 pens down. A large male Belgian Malinois with the look of a dog built for work. As he paces the length, his right front guards on the turn and the weight shift lands heavy on the left. A small tell that repeats every few strides. Morgan approaches Ranger's run with her hands open and relaxed so he can see all movements. She angles her body offline, avoids a direct stare, and lets him come forward for a slow sniff across knuckles, sleeve, and pockets before the latch clicks. Inside, she kneels just out of reach, gives him a second pass at scent, then eases a palm to the shoulder. Her fingers travel down the radius and ulna to the metacarpal and carpal area where heat and swelling sit like a raised ridge under skin. The picture matches repeated impact on hard surfaces and a workload that outpaced recovery. She states that Ranger requires a veterinary evaluation within 24 hours and recommends restricted duty until cleared for full mission-capable status. Kincaid's jaw tightens, but he says nothing. And Morgan notes his silence without pushing. She exits with the same slow cadence she used to enter, shuts the gate, and writes the observation in clear, spare language that will travel cleanly through a chain of command. Pixel waits near the far end. A 3-year-old female Belgian Malinois flagged for aggression and a low alert rate. Morgan steps inside, sits on the concrete, and keeps her voice off, letting arousal reset while she breathes in a steady count. Pixel paces a loop, circles back, and sniffs boots dark with dust. When Morgan traces a light touch along the right rib cage, the dog flinches in a way that is more memory than fear, a sign of an old rib injury that healed poorly and now drives defensive reactivity. Morgan keeps posture angled away and uses only short eye glances that rise and fall like the tide. Pixel settles at her knee with a breath that deepens into a working rhythm, and the run feels larger as tension lets go of the corners. She documents findings in plain terms, with no drama. Adjust training tempo, implement pain management, and request follow-up from a veterinary behaviorist at Lackland Air Force Base. Then schedule a progress check that gives space for healing. Before she leaves, she checks water levels and bedding with the same calm hands she used for the exam. Canine welfare is mission critical, and the notes she carries out of the run are the first bricks of a safer program. The chow hall hums at midday with the clatter of trays and the burnt edge of coffee. Petty Officer First Class Derek Hines leans into a casual challenge about deployments that lands like a test more than a question. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale keeps her shoulders square and names Bagram and Helmand, offering nothing else for operational security. She returns to her meal with calm bearing, fork moving at an easy pace while conversations pass around her like weather. United States Navy SEALs drift by with flat looks and no small talk. The way a place signals that competence speaks louder than charm. The room runs on efficiency and unspoken standards. Outside the chow hall, the air carries salt and the rubber smell of the running track. Morgan files the brief exchange in the same folder as a range safety rule. Noted and done. Then heads back to the kennels with the steady rhythm of a checklist. Work first, commentary later. Night settles on the transient barracks around 9:30 p.m. A slur waits on her door and marker, the letters already going dull in the damp air. She cleans it off with alcohol and a rag, checks the surface once more, and decides not to file a complaint. Her left wrist aches the way metal does when weather turns heavy. A quiet reminder of Landstuhl and what bones remember. She stretches the fingers, breathes out, and sets her alarm before the room goes dark. The mission has a center, and she keeps to it. She stands for a moment in the quiet and lets the sting pass through. The vow is plain and private. Stay on task. Trust the dog. And let the work speak. The Naval Special Warfare Vehicle search lane sits quiet under a pale sky as cones mark an 8-vehicle course. Petty Officer Second Class Travis Kincaid clips a lead to Ranger and gives a curt nod that reads like a start signal. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale watches the baseline. Not the handler. Because the dog's change of behavior says more than anybody's face. Ranger works wheel wells and undercarriages with a steady sweep. Nose, painting the air and the seams. He gives 2 clean final responses early, then hesitates on an engine bay where scent swirls. By the end, he finds 6 out of 8 training aids in 11 minutes. All inert scent articles used for imprinting and evaluation. Kincaid looks to Morgan as if waiting for a flinch. She only asks for 5 quiet minutes inside Pixel's run to reset arousal. Then brings the 3-year-old Belgian Malinois to the line. Master Chief Ethan Rourke stands back with a neutral face that belongs to checklists and range cards. Morgan works without voice, using hand signals, shoulder angles, and clean lead management to let Pixel own the scent. Pixel shortens her stride at the first wheel, snaps to odor, and gives a decisive final response that Morgan marks and confirms. The rhythm builds until the dog is moving like a metronome set to purpose. Halfway through, Pixel kicks into a tight bracket under a rear bumper and resolves odor without crowding the hide. Morgan slides the tape on the fender. Steps, clear, and keeps her breathing easy so the dog stays in the pocket. Pixel clears all 8 aids in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. No live explosives. No drama. Rourke's attention shifts a notch. Small but real. As the last confirm lands, Morgan rewards with stillness and a brief forehead touch. No loud praise. Reinforcing calm focus that pays off on real lanes. The numbers speak without anyone needing to translate them. The group around the lane goes quiet in the way teams get when facts settle a room. Kincaid's face holds a flush that looks like heat and effort, and he says nothing. Morgan walks Pixel off the lane with steady breathing and a closed clipboard. Inside the boundaries of proper military conduct and respect for the dogs who do the work. The transient barracks room is 8 by 10 feet and dark. The window looking over a dim parking lot. Damp salt air slips through the frame and settles on skin. Her left wrist aches around the titanium plate and screws. A small throb that tracks the weather tonight. She sits still and lets memory arrive in order. Helmand, in 2019, with Rook freezing at a doorway on alert as Captain Nathan Cole stepped past and the blast followed. A medical evacuation flight to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Fluorescent light and steady hands on bone there. Loss recorded in sterile ink turns into something simple that she can carry. Never let arrogance cost a dog or a teammate again. She tightens laces, stands, and steps into the cool night. Fog hangs low over pavement and the bass sounds like ocean breathing in her ears. She runs 6 miles on familiar loops, counting breath and footfalls until the ache in her wrist fades to background. The track smells like rubber and dew. Back at the barracks, she takes a cold shower, towels off, and sets an alarm for 4 hours before first light. Uniform on. She slides onto the rack and lets the room go quiet. Purpose sits where anger could live. The steadier companion for hours ahead. And she breathes while setting the thought that steadies her hands. Trust the dog. Dogs do not lie. Morning will come fast soon. Morning breaks thin and gray at the Naval Special Warfare Urban Training Facility about 2 miles inland from Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Petty Officer Second Class Travis Kincaid briefs a field training exercise with a 90-minute timeline to clear a 3-story concrete building. He lists multiple entry points. Internal stairwells. More than 40 rooms. An unknown improvised explosive device threats, with role players, under ambiguous rules of engagement. Master Chief Ethan Rourke stands back with arms easy at his sides and watches without endorsement. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale asks if the evolution is officially scheduled and supervised with proper safety control. Kincaid answers in a way that sounds practiced, but does not meet standard. Morgan selects Pixel as her working dog and uses 20 minutes to plan. She writes a simple scheme of maneuver built on systematic clearance and tape marking of fines. She notes lead management, no rushed movement, and a default to bypass anything that suggests a possible command detonation, such as unexplained vibration behind a door. Her medical preparation is set to tactical combat casualty care basics. She checks a tourniquet, gauze, and a marker to note the time of application. She reviews a short radio call template for medical evacuation, so words will come clean under stress. Range safety rules are stated again for the record. No live ammunition is authorized inside the training complex, and simulated effects will be used to control risk. The building crew confirms that scenario control is in place and that training aids are accounted for. Morgan loads Pixel into the transport van and runs a quick touch check on the harness and a 6-foot lead. She breathes once for focus and watches the marine layer slide along the ridgeline like a slow tide. Procedure over ego, she reminds herself, then closes the door and drives to the lane. The building takes the light like a bunker and smells of dust and old air. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale clips a 6-foot tactical lead to Pixel and lets the Belgian Malinois lift the breeze at the threshold. She keeps her shoulders quiet and gives the dog the lane. Inside, she treats air currents like a map. Pixel ranges. Head low, then high. Tail neutral as scent pulls in a thin line along the baseboards. Morgan watches for the first change of behavior. A small drift that says odor is nearby. The first hard alert hits at a closed door that looks harmless. Pixel freezes. Nostrils working. Ears set. Body tight without creeping. Morgan marks the frame with tape and calls it confirmed for training records without touching the handle. They move room to room with a rhythm that saves steps. Pixel searches edges, returns to center, and resolves odor before Morgan places a second mark. The first floor is clear in 19 minutes, with no missed threats on the route. A narrow stairwell rises with uneven concrete and a shadow that eats light. Pixel hesitates at the third step and glances back with weight pinned forward. Morgan sweeps low with a small light and finds a thin tripwire across the riser. Marks it, bypasses safely, and continues. On the second floor, a role player in civilian clothing shouts in a local language from a doorway. Morgan issues a clear verbal warning, holds the wall, and keeps Pixel between them like a moving buffer. Then moves past along the opposite side, under rules of engagement. The hallway returns to dust, breath, and the soft pad of paws. At the far end, a heavy metal door breathes a warning that only the dog can read. Pixel refuses to close within 8 feet and locks into a distant alert that does not break. Morgan kneels, places her palm near the base, feels a faint vibration, and calls it a possible command detonation hazard before bypassing the room. 78 minutes into the evolution. A simulated explosion sounds from below and training smoke rolls up the stairwell. A loudspeaker injects a surprise casualty on the 3rd floor. An objective not briefed at the start. Morgan finishes the 2nd floor methodically, then sends Pixel to check the stairwell for more hazards. Pixel alerts in 2 places on the climb, both marked without drama. On the 3rd floor, Morgan finds a role player with a simulated traumatic lower leg amputation. She checks airway and breathing, applies a tourniquet high on the thigh until bleeding stops, notes the time with a marker on the casualty card, and makes a radio call formatted for medical evacuation. The casualty stabilized. Morgan returns to clearance at a measured pace that keeps the dog thinking. Pixel pushes into 2 more pockets of odor and pins, both with clean final responses. Devices that were not on the official plan. Morgan marks in plain language and logs locations for verification. They exit into flat daylight at 1 hour and 46 minutes. Petty Officer, 2nd Class Travis Kincaid, declares a failed casualty timeline by 9 minutes and lets the verdict hang in the air. Morgan answers that unbriefed objectives violate training, safety practices, and that her systematic clearance met standard with 0 misses. Master Chief Ethan Rourke remains a silent observer at the edge of the lane. He holds a clipboard and says nothing. Eyes moving from tape marks to the dog that stands loose and steady at heel. The tension bleeds off in the slow way discipline does. Measured and exact. As Morgan gives Pixel water and feels the calm that comes from procedure over ego, Master Chief Ethan Rourke walks the training lane with a clipboard and a slow pace. Dust hangs in the air while tape marks catch the morning light. He checks each door frame, stairwell, and corridor against the scenario plan. He verifies that every training device was identified and logged exactly where the records say. He pauses at 2 locations that are not on the plan. He notes unauthorized placement and initials the margins for traceability. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale stands by, with Pixel settled at heel. She keeps her voice low and her answers factual. Limited to times, locations, and final responses. Nothing extra. Nothing missing. Rourke documents the variance under scenario control and safety oversight. Unplanned devices compromise risk management and training integrity. He writes that conclusion in plain language and turns the page. He notifies the officer in charge, Lieutenant Commander Grant Ellison, with a brief call that lists findings and next steps. Petty Officer 2nd Class Travis Kincaid is told to remain available for questions. There is no public confrontation in the hallway. The clipboard closes with a quiet snap that sounds like a decision. Rourke logs the site secure and returns the building to control. The tape marks stay for verification and teaching points. Word moves through team spaces the way it always does. Conversations drop when boots pass and start again when doors close. The pressure builds without anyone raising a voice. Morgan checks water, updates records, and schedules a follow-up walk of the kennels. Bearing stays level and the dog stays calm. The work continues while accountability finds its place. The night sits heavy behind the kennel as lights hum over chain link. Petty Officer 2nd Class Travis Kincaid turns a key and points to a 20 by 20 foot training pen where 3 patrol-trained Belgian Malinois wait with bright eyes and hard lines. A few United States Navy SEALs watch in uneasy silence that smells like salt and concrete. This is an unsafe and unauthorized stunt that violates naval special warfare safety practices and animal welfare guidance. Staff Sergeant Morgan Hale understands the risk and enters without drama because someone has to hold the line. The latch clicks shut and the metal carries sound across the pad. Ranger takes the front with a low stalk, shoulders rolling as his weight glides towards center. Brawler slips left and Spartan angles right. A clean flanking pattern that tightens the space without touching it. Breath fogs a little in the damp air and the pen shrinks to simple choices. Morgan avoids direct eye contact and lowers to one knee, with her body turned slightly offline. She lets her breathing slow until her chest and shoulders move like tide water. An open palm shows steady skin and empty hands. Fingers loose and calm, where the dogs can read them. Ranger closes first, with nostrils working and ears forward. Pressure building and then easing as scent sorts into meaning. He steps close until his forehead rests against the center of her chest. Brawler and Spartan settle into a loose sit, with mouths soft and eyes alive. Drive reshaped into focus. Morgan stands with controlled movement and asks for the gate to be opened, with steady authority that is more bearing than volume. Chief Marco Ruiz exhales like a man who just saw physics turn inside out. The line of observers shifts as the moment lands on muscle memory and ethics. Morgan rolls her sleeve to show a black paw tattoo, with the name Rook above K9 Juliet 7. A quiet marker from a joint Special Operations K9 program turns into context as faces change one by one. The Helmand story connects to the person in front of them, and the room seems to tilt. 8 minutes later, Master Chief Ethan Rourke arrives with Lieutenant Commander Grant Ellison, the officer in charge. Ellison asks who authorized the stunt, and Rourke identifies Kincaid in a voice that belongs to checklists. Ellison removes Kincaid from all kennel duties and directs that he face non-judicial punishment under Article 15 at Captain's Mast. Terms stay plain and accurate because that is how accountability works. Possible outcomes include reduction in rate, forfeiture of pay, restriction to base, and a punitive letter in the service record. The pen gate opens and Morgan steps out while Ranger leans a shoulder against the fence like a calm anchor. Ellison invites Morgan to take operational control of the SEAL Team 7K9 program. She will rewrite standard operating procedures and set training based on readiness and welfare rather than noise. Immediate fixes start tonight with 30-day veterinary checks. Rest protocols for dogs with physical or behavioral stress. And referral to a veterinary behaviorist from Lackland Air Force Base, with documentation for each working dog. Ranger is placed on restricted duty with physiotherapy for a carpal joint issue and returns to full mission-capable status after 6 weeks. Pixel, once labeled aggressive, becomes the top explosives detection dog in 40 days through calm. Precise handling and correct reward. The records carry numbers that match what handlers see on the lane. A young petty officer, 3rd class, named Evan Whitaker, admits he is worried about failing. Morgan hands him Pixel's lead and tells him to walk and listen to the dog. He returns with a different cadence in his shoulders and the first thread of a working bond. The cultural shift takes root in small routines that hold over time. Kennel logs fill with clean notes and clear plans. The tone turns steady as handlers trade volume for observation and hurry for craft. Most nights end the same way. Morgan checks water, bedding, and records, then walks the line and lets the dog settle around her like a tide, finding shore. Ranger presses his head gently to her hand through the fence while she touches the tattoo and repeats the quiet line that guides her work about trusting the dog.